you released the Porsche Majeure remixes EP this year, and you had the 3 mixes by yourself, Reloaded, Regenesis, and Rebirth. How did those 3 titles and the connotations of them influence the approach to the remixes themselves?
I think with the titling, that some of those came more after the fact. I kind of had the 3 pieces like written and kind of produced and put together, and it's kind of like, well, what felt right for them, as each one is a different styles and different ways, and it's trying to sort of find a title that fits each one. But obviously it's that theme. It's like, Porsche Majeure is a track that's kind of, it's kind of, well, sort of 5 years old at that point for like release one. So it's like, it's an opportunity to kind of dust it down and give it a new shot, give it different tries and play around with it really. And I think, the 3 that I worked on, they sort of turned out very differently. And so I was quite pleased with that,
Did you work on more than just the 3? Were there other versions?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of versions that just sort of didn't, I don't know, they didn't really work in sort of, they didn't gel together the way those 3 did. So they kind of, it's finding the ones that worked well together. And also with the DC Gore remix, it was kind of like a back and forth. So like, Dom did like loads of work on it, had it all there, and then kind of bounced it back over to me. And we kind of, it's almost like, producing it together and kind of putting it back together. So that was really exciting as well. That was cool.
You mentioned there as well that the track is 5 years old now?
Yeah.
How would you say that your aesthetic interests have kind of developed and evolved in that time when it comes to the music?
I think in terms of aesthetics and sort of my own interest, like Porsche Majeure has always kind of been a part of that broader kind of interest and what's there. So in many ways, it's not that I'd say that some of my interests are still similar, but it's from it's just like a little portion of it. It's kind of a part of that. And I don't know. I think I suppose it's hard to get away from being a pandemic and stuff to kind of somewhat influence your thoughts.
I guess that idea of rebirth, this kind of destructive force to reset everything.
In some ways, I mean, I don't know whether that was intentional or not. It's kind of almost just for the track, just kind of seeing it in a different way. I think that was it. I suppose more like, how do you take this thing that I've played it hundreds of times. It's sort of ever present. It's like how do you kind of reimagine it in a different way. And in many ways, some of those tracks, like they started off without much Porsche Majeure going on at all. They kind of had their own sort of things. They kind of found their own style. And then when brought like some of the Porsche Majeure kind of like pieces and other lyrics around, it just fit really nicely. And I think those are the tracks that ended up as part of that EP. Because it's a strange one how you it's like reevaluating your own music. And so I tried to do it in a way it wasn't like that. It was just like writing new pieces of music. It's just like enjoying that. I think it would have been really tough if I'd just gone straight back to source and just like picked it apart and just tried to do that. So yeah, I think it worked for how it did.
With the album that Porsche was on as well, I remember that you had Dean mix it.
Yeah, Dean Honer. Yeah.
And you spoke about at the time how that kind of was the glue that let everything kind of sit together. With this remixes EP, what was the glue that allowed everything to hold?
I don't know what the real kind of part of it was. I think, Maps have done a great remix for us, and I was kind of thinking like, it'd be really nice to use that in some way. And so at the time of it, we just kind of started working on them. But I think in some ways it's like, for me, I suppose it's part way between like, hearing Amy of Charlotte Spiral, her vocals on Dom's remix, and hearing, I suppose probably somewhere between like Reloaded and Regenesis for me, just to see like they work really well together. As hearing it, it's like, oh, that's cool, and it's you don't expect it. It's hard to kind of know where it's pivoting to. You start writing songs, you start putting music together. You don't necessarily know like, oh, this this EP needs a whatever song. It's more about what comes and seeing the joins together there. But I do think certainly that moment, because I think that was a real sort of eye opener, kind of hearing someone else sing my lyrics. Because obviously it's part of it, but I think in terms of the performance, I've always been interested in more having like lyrics on screen than necessarily making the vocals like a real focal point. So that was really interesting, sort of hearing it, someone else sing it.
I know when you make the videos as well, you'll kind of source all these different clips and use them to express yourself through that. Is that a similar thing when it's someone else singing your vocals? A similar feeling that you get from it, like using like almost someone else is expressing what you feel?
In some ways, but I think it's very different having someone sing it with that kind of human voice than it is, you know, finding some footage that seems to either match the theme or matches what's in my own head about it. It's a very different, like, you know, I can see, you know, you can see sort of different visuals and you can kind of put something together and you suddenly feel like, okay, this is working to convey what I'm thinking, but you hear someone else sort of sing it and it's completely different. I think more so than any way of sort of, you know, sourcing things and research, well, not researching, but, you know, finding different clips and working through it and seeing it and seeing those things realised. It's very different from hearing someone singing your own songs and kind of having that back to yourself, you know what I mean? It's a feedback loop that I'm not used to. You know, I'm used to that kind of thing where like I'll listen to my music, I'll kind of put some videos together and use that, and then that's there. And in terms of the way that I write, it's almost like one influences the other. So like I could have some visuals that might influence the way a track might sort of lean into it, or like the other way around, you know what I mean? So that's very different to just I don't know, just the impact of hearing them sort of sung back to me.
Is using someone else as a vocalist something you'd be interested in exploring further in future?
I think so. I mean, I think, you know, it's really enjoyable. I think it certainly gives you a totally different perspective on it. I think as well because, you know, when I'm like writing lyrics, I'm thinking it's for me, and it's just like this moment, this song, what's there, and I might have some kind of, you know, pre-prepared lyrics in some way, some sort of things I've jotted down here and there, but by and large, it's more, you know, I've kind of, the music's there, and I'm more like kind of bedding the lyrics into it and finding that thing. When you hear it back, it's some of it's kind of cringe, but some of it's, I don't know, I think some of it, with that song in particular, because it's such a, to hear it the way that Amy sung it, which is, it brings a much more like melodic and kind of like a poppy sort of feel to it, really. It's more like an 80s kind of, you know, kind of Italo disco kind of feel to it. And I think that, framing those lyrics and framing that track, really take it into a different sort of place, you know. And it's just really exciting hearing it that way.
You previously mentioned too that television is your biggest influence. How many hours a day are we at?
Probably more since lockdown, but I couldn't hazard a guess. I mean, the thing is as well, it's like, you know, I don't know. I do like that. I think for me, like, you know, television is an influence, but in many ways, I'm more interested in like people's memories of TV, like memories of TV shows, or like, you know, placing themselves as like a child, like, you know, the kind of influence of that and what those things mean, because I think there's it's really, I don't know, it seems it's a very vibrant place to kind of like kind of find yourself in. Just, it's really interesting, people's own interpretations of it, of their own childhoods, their own sort of nostalgia for it and things. I just find it interesting.
I mean, you can tell a lot about a time period from the television that was created during it.
Yeah, I mean, you can. There's a lot of things that I suppose date TV shows and sort of, you know, put that in a particular place. And I suppose for every generation and every person, like, they have their own memories that you know, are formed at that age, and you can see that. And I think in some ways that's quite interesting. I suppose, you know, the visuals that I'm interested in all kind of thematic around and sort of fix around a point, I suppose, in my youth and my kind of seeing it. I suppose that's where I'm kind of interested in and interested in that place.
Do you think more about the past or future musically?
I think we're in a weird time where it doesn't really matter. I do think that since, like, you know, I suppose streaming, I suppose people's, just the internet and the availability of music, it has changed how people understand music. I mean, you know, it might be my own interpretation, but I don't feel as connected to a particular genre or a particular, you know, movement in music or things that are happening. Things are still exciting, things are still different, but, you know, it's just as easy to find like a track that was made 2 weeks ago than it is, you know, finding like, you know, 2 decades ago. It's so easy to do that, and I think the way people consume music, it doesn't really matter. In my mind, it doesn't really matter that. I don't think it happens. I think it's almost like it's almost like older songs become more current, and I think they become, it's weird. It's like, I hate listen to a track where it's, it almost finds its time now as much as it did then.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.